Hello BookTube, hello Internet. I'm back with another book review of a book I just finished, and that is The Goddess of Mtwara and Other Stories, which is the anthology, short story anthology of the 2017 Cain Prize for African Writing. So the Cain Prize is, as it says, Prize for African Writing, so short stories by African authors, which means people born in Africa, nationals of African countries, or people with an African parent, and it's awarded to stories that are submitted to them and they have to be being published within the last 5 years and not previously considered for the prize. That's the criteria. Apart from that, the stories have to have been written originally or in translation in English. And in the case of a translation, then the prize money will be split between the author and the translator. So except this anthology is for the 2017 edition of the prize. It contains the 5 short stories that were selected for the shortlist. At the time of publication, or at least at the time of putting together the anthology, the winner wasn't known yet. But we do know now that it is the story of the girl whose birds flew away by Bushra al-Fadil from Sudan. So apart from the 5 stories of the shortlist, you also get 11 more stories which were written during a writers' workshop organized by the Cain Prize organization. Variety in the stories, you get very in terms of genre, you have of course literary fiction, but also science fiction, fantasy, Afrofuturism. I'm not quite sure if things that are more fantastical or magical realist rather than about the future, whether they count as Afrofuturism. But there are certainly definitely really futuristic stories as well. So all in all, that was nice to see that you get this mix, right? So you don't get, like in a lot of other literary prizes or literary fields, I feel there's this hard boundary between you have literary fiction and you have genre fiction. And maybe like some genre fiction writers are good enough to be considered literary fiction, or some literary writers are allowed to get away with having some science fiction or fantasy elements in their writing. But here we have really a mix, and there's no clear distinction or categorization that way. So that was really nice. Also in terms of the style of writing, there is very traditional linear narratives, also very experimental narratives, particularly the story. Yes, an unperson stands on the cracked pavement contemplating being and nothingness by Tendai Huchu from Zimbabwe. I'm still not quite sure what that story was about. It was a beautiful story to read, it flowed very nicely. Maybe if I'd actually read Sartre's original Being and Nothingness, I would understand more of the story. That was, yeah, completely experimental. I haven't read James Joyce, but from kind of snippets and what I've heard about it, grounded me that kind of stream of consciousness, unconnected thoughts style of writing. And then you also very traditional linear stories, like I said. So it's a really great anthology for that variety. It's also really great for discovering new authors. Out of the 17 authors in here, no, am I saying it correct? 5 plus 11 and 1 is double, so that's 15 authors. Sorry, 15 authors in here. There was only one who I'd heard of before, that's Leslie Neka Arima from Nigeria. And I'd heard of her before because LeVar Burton, on his podcast, LeVar Burton Reads, read one of her stories, What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky, and I'll link that down below. And that story is from an anthology of hers by the same name, which also was recently discussed by Catherine from the Readers Athenaeum, and I'll pop a link to that video down below as well. And she mentioned another story from that anthology, which is Who Will Greet You at Home, about a woman who makes a baby out of hair, and that story is also in here. Arima has another story in here as well, because she also attended the writers' workshop. Who Will Greet You at Home was one of the shortlisted stories. Of the shortlist, I already said, the story of the girl whose birds flew away was the eventual winner. It was my least favorite story, at least of the shortlist. But I think that might have been kind of unfair, and due to more my perspective than the story. It is one of the stories in translation, possibly the only translated story in this anthology. It was originally written in Arabic, and a lot of so it's been translated in English. I think the translation is very good, or as far as I can judge, but it has preserved a lot of the metaphors and linguistic style of the Arabic, which is good, but it's something that I'm very unfamiliar with. So I found it kind of hard to relate and to really understand what the story was about, what was going on. So I think maybe I need to reread it, give it a second chance, or maybe need to read more stories from that cultural background and gain more of an understanding of it. My favorites of this collection, there were two. One from the Writers' Workshop, which was Fidel by Agazit Abate from Ethiopia. And that's a story about kind of bars and expectations we set for people in relationships, and what is realistic to expect and what not, and whether people live up to our expectations or not, or disappoint us, and how to cope and deal with that. And it's also about Fidel Castro. You'll have to read it yourself to find out. I'll see if you can read it online anywhere, or find it anywhere. Otherwise, and if I manage to find it, I'll leave a link down below. And my other favorite, the absolute favorite of the collection for me, was The Virus by Magogodi Bamfele Makena from South Africa. It was a beautiful story. It's told as a second-person narrative, so as if you are in conversation with this old boer in South Africa. It's set in the future where kind of terrorist cyber attacks and computer viruses have brought down the West, and lots of people are moving to South Africa in search of a better life in a country which isn't quite as interwebbed, and therefore less affected by these cyber attacks. And so it's written from the perspective of this boer who's kind of reminiscing about, well, these people coming to South Africa, and also his earlier experiences in the war in Angola and Namibia. Not sure, certainly Namibia, not sure about Angola. Anyway, his experiences in the war. And yeah, it's a beautiful story. It's the war in question is incredibly racist and also somewhat misogynist. And the narrative definitely subverts it. It points out kind of the hypocrisies in his ways of thinking, the interactions between the Boers and these new people, these new immigrants, closely mirror kind of the colonialist interactions during the first wave of European colonization, excepting now the white Boers are kind of the ones who are having the shorter end of the stick. And yeah, all the hypocrisies, so that the person that he has connected most to in his life is a black man, even though he hates black people, or at least feels that he's superior to them. And he's a fully formed, complex character, and yet at the same time he doesn't get away with his views, right? The story does point out all the absurdities and hypocrisies and downright horribleness of these views, and that was just beautiful, and just the whole kind of flow of the story, the way it's told, the narrative structure just worked for me, where he kind of gets layers upon layers of flashbacks as he is reminiscing about a past experience, and then that makes him reminisce about his childhood, which informed that experience. So the kind of premise of the computer virus in that was maybe not so plausible, but I completely didn't care about that. The story as a whole was just really great. There's some interesting interviews with Caine about the story as well, where she's also kind of questioning where the story came from and why she had this. Right, she really explains that she talks about writing down the story of this old Boer who she kind of found within her somewhere, right? As if she'd really spoken to someone and was writing down the story. And she wonders a bit about, where did he come from? Why was he inside of her? So it's interesting to read. I'll leave a link to that interview. Also, interview she mentions, or in the biography it mentions, that she's working on a project where she's writing down stories about the lives of everyday South Africans, and I definitely want to keep an eye out for that, because if she manages to give more people a voice as wonderful as in this short story, that will definitely be something to watch out for. And my final recommendation is that you can find on SoundCloud, I'll leave a link below, a recording of Caine reading the story herself, and I highly recommend you listen to it. You get all the different flavors of all the different languages and accents that are in the story, and also very fundamental to the story. In the interview I mentioned, she talks about language being primal and being keys to the way people think and perceive the world, and especially in South Africa, which is a very multilingual country, right? People were forced to learn English and or Afrikaans, even if that's not, say, the native language. In modern South Africa, post-apartheid, we have, there are 11 official languages, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it's also, not coincidental, possibly, that apartheid is an Afrikaans word, and we refer to that system with the Afrikaans word. So by listening to a story, you really get the flavor of all those languages and accents and linguistic interactions as well. So yeah, all in all, if you are interested at all in African writing and you want to meet some new authors you may never have heard of, at least if you're not into African writing that much, I think this provides a really good entry point. You get a wide array of styles, you get a mix of genres. It's not a huge mix, so there's literary fiction, there's science fiction, there's fantasy. So it's not crime or romance, but you do get kind of a broader mix of styles in a pure literary short story collection. You get 15 fantastic authors to get to know about from all over the African continent, and also people who've moved away from Africa. So yeah, highly recommended. I'll leave a link down below, and I'd also be interested to hear if you've read any of these authors or any other African authors that you can recommend. Tell me about them below, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye. You get 15 fantastic authors to get to know about from all over the African continent, and also people who've moved away from Africa. So yeah, highly recommended. I'll leave a link down below, and I'd also be interested to hear if you've read any of these authors or any other African authors that you can recommend. Tell me about them below, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.